Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's podcast. I'm Doris Nagel, CEO of Globalocity. We're consultants helping companies successfully improve their indirect distribution channel sales, always focusing on partnering skills. We are delighted to have with us today Sophie Lechner as our guest to give us her perspectives about finding and using partners when expanding overseas, particularly focusing on helping non-U.S. companies find great partners while building their businesses in the U.S. She is in a unique position to talk about some of these issues as she was born in Pakistan, but raised in France and now obviously living in the U.S. Her parents were French and Pakistani, so she learned early some of the many challenges of cross-cultural communication and finding your way around in different countries and across borders. She began her career as in-house legal counsel for Bouygues, then British Petroleum in France. After completing her MBA, she joined Pfizer in New York, where she led teams and projects across many countries. She pioneered the role of alliance manager there. Later, she joined Bayer, where she led multinational conferences and workshops. After spending 25 years in global strategy on multicultural teams, she founded her own company, Global Commerce Education, creating the G2 Experience program to accelerate companies' global expansion. She's a certified cross-cultural trainer. She has a bachelor's of law from King's College in London, a maîtrise de droit and a DSS from the Université de Paris, Panthéon-Sorbonne. Sorry for my bad French accent. And a master's degree in business administration from Columbia University in New York. Sophie, I am so glad to have the chance to chat with you today. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Doris. It's a pleasure, and I look forward to our chat.
Well, I think, Sophie, the natural place to start is to tell our listeners a little bit about your business model, how you came to that model, and how you use partnerships as part of that business model.
Well, actually, partnership is at the core of the model. Without that, there is no program. So we found that companies who want to enter the US market, and this is actually true for any market entry, but that's where we focus, are usually overwhelmed with the amount of information that they need to know. They don't know where to turn, who to ask for help. And we created this program. Is almost like a funnel to guide them in their market entry and guide them to figure out what they need to know, because you need at any specific given point, you need a specific type of information. So we guide them with that in terms of strategy, cross-cultural training, and meeting the right people. So the entire model rests on our very broad network of specialists in a bunch of different fields, and we sort of curate the faculty for each group that comes in.
Interesting. So I know partnering is fundamental, and those of us who have done business internationally, I think intuitively understand that you need partnerships, but maybe you can elaborate for people who are new to international expansion, why having some of these people at your fingertips is so important.
Well, there's many levels at which this is important. The one thing that is probably the most apparent, or the first thing that comes to mind, is the fact that you're going to need a number of specialist professional service providers. So everybody knows you're going to need a lawyer, especially if you set up an entity here. Depending on your industry, you may need some regulatory specialists. You're definitely going to need some marketing help and advertising or promotional help.
Right.
Branding for sure. So all those aspects you're going to need to have specialists. And the issue is that there are dozens and hundreds and thousands of these service providers, and how to choose is really difficult.
Right, because some will tell you they can do everything, and that's unlikely. Some will tell you they can do this and that, but not these other things. And so putting a patchwork together of the experts you need is probably a challenge for a lot of companies.
Yes. And we found that a lot of people just go based on either a recommendation from someone, which, obviously is one of the important ways, but don't necessarily look into or investigate whether that particular provider is a good fit for them. They may be a good fit for whatever friend or colleague recommended them. Doesn't mean they're going to be a good fit for you. There's size, there's language, there's experience, there's all kinds of criteria.
And then you have the problem, of course, I'm sure this is true to an extent, more or less, depending on the countries you look at, but I'm just thinking of consultants who are hungry for business here in the U.S., specifically with companies who come here. And most people who are service providers, their first reaction when somebody says, well, can you do this? Their answer is yes. Sure, I can do that for you. And they may absolutely have no experience whatsoever doing it, but they figure having some business and figuring it out is better than saying no. So
yeah, and that's true. I mean, we always say, as a good entrepreneur, when the client asks you something, you should always say yes. So not to fault them in any way, I think, but the bottom line is, as the buyer, as the company coming into the US, you really need to do your due diligence. So the first due diligence is, of course, to check that they're a reputable company and the, the basic due diligence. But then it's really figuring out what questions to ask, how to assess whether they are what you need, and they will see the different nuances that you need to have explored. So those are the things that we do. We're not a consultant. We're really a training. I like to call it a capacity building program, because we will, for example, for a lawyer, we will help the companies find a number of different lawyers so they could choose from, but we also tell them what the criteria are, and we help them learn, if you will, how to select for the good fit in the different professions.
So I know you help match companies. So in a way, you're a matchmaking company as well. But you, if I understand correctly, you put together a short list for companies. So let's say they need a lawyer or they need a tax expert. You might present to them a short list of recommended partners. Is that right?
It is and it isn't, Doris. What happens is it's actually a program that we offer that companies come on. So we know ahead of time, of course, having worked with them a little bit, we know what they're going to need in terms of which professions. And we organize events where there might be a couple of lawyers and maybe perhaps a couple of their clients that can share their experiences, and we do panel discussions. And the companies, I forgot to mention that the program is really offered to groups of companies, so it's not, we don't really work one-on-one with companies. It's always a group.
Interesting.
Yeah. So we explore, we ask the lawyers to cover, the most important differences, the areas where companies need to really pay attention and be aware of some pitfalls. And then we have the clients of those professionals share some of their experiences, things that went wrong when they first arrived, or things that they were grateful they were pointed to by their advisors. So in that sense, yes, we do a pre-selection, but we don't just give lists of lawyers or, other professions. So
how do you find that short list of partners? How do you go about finding them, and what are you looking for?
Yes, so we have like I said before, we have a very broad network and deep. And so if we don't find the right one, the right kind of lawyer, or I use lawyers as an example, just so easy, but the right kind of professional for
if
this.
If you come to the U.S., unfortunately, you do need lawyers. That's a sobering reality probably for a lot of companies,
yes.
But anyway.
Yes, true. So if we don't find that right professional immediately within our network, it's easy to find, recommendations from our own network, because it's just so broad. But the point being that we are quite selective in the professionals that we bring in. They need to have, that's kind of a non-starter. Otherwise, it's they need to have experience, in-depth experience in the country of origin of the companies, because otherwise you are juxtaposing someone from one system or one, setting with someone from another, and you can have a good exchange of information, but some of it will be lost along the way because the professional who's presenting is not necessarily going to know what the assumptions are that are in the client's mind, in the participant's mind, and maybe the participant doesn't even know the assumptions that they're making. It's all about both of them don't know what they don't know.
Right.
So if you have a professional who has worked in that country or is from that country or, has a lot of clients from that country, they're going to have a first insight into the types of assumptions and the types of misconceptions that the participants are going to have. So that's critical.
That would seem right.
And then, of course, it's, we choose a professional competence, etc., but also people that have a mentality of helping and educating. Some people are really oriented by nature to just do the business and,
Not ask
right.
many questions, just tend to the
Yeah.
issue at hand.
Mhm. Yeah, just do it. But some people, and quite a few, thankfully for us, are really very sharing and education oriented. It's amazing the number of professionals you talk to who really enjoy sharing their experience and sort of teaching, not just saying, oh, okay, this is what you need, give to me, I'll do it, and then you'll pay me. So that's good. I mean, so we have to we interview these people. We don't call it an interview, but we have conversations with obviously all the people in our network that we bring in, and some people we just don't think are a good fit,
Yeah.
if they're not that type.
It's interesting that you mentioned the helping mentality. For us as a partnering company, if you will, and we've even been thinking about using the tagline, the partnering people. It's very clear that to us that you need to consider both perspectives. And I mean, truly try to walk a mile in the other person's shoes in order
Mm-hmm.
to be a good partner. And it seems to me that that's kind of what you're talking about here too,
Mm-hmm.
is
Mm-hmm.
looking for people who want to be a partner, not just an outsourced vendor for a client. Is that
Yeah,
fair?
yeah. That's true, and it needs to be beyond the transactional, because if you're and the boundaries are not necessarily as clear cut as I'm about to say, but if you're a US person who needs a US lawyer, it may be more transactional. You kind of know what you need. You're buying a house, you need a contract.
You need
But
a
if you're
will,
coming from a
whatever. Yeah.
right, yeah, it's more straightforward. Whereas if you're coming from abroad, there's this huge layer of complexity added that requires you to have to learn more about what the different options are, and so that's where you need help.
Yeah, I
Yeah, I
think
do.
that one of the things that's important about any kind of international expansion is that companies often don't realize how small changes in the facts or how they're planning to go about doing something can totally
Mhm.
change, for
Yes.
example, whether there's income tax that's triggered or not,
Mhm.
or whether there's VAT that's triggered or not.
Mhm.
So if you don't know where those boundaries are, companies often you find will say, well, I'm going to do this and we have these people and we're going to do this, but there's
Yeah.
other things that they're doing that
Yeah.
that are interconnected that change the answer you might give them.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Actually, I have a good example with that. We met a young woman from the UK who had a food company in the UK, and she came over here and she actually had organized some of the activities for herself, and she had called a number of food distributors here in the US because food distributors are The people that she does business with in the UK, they're the ones that go and promote her product and sell it to retailers, etc., which is what she needed. So when we met her, it was the first day of her trip, and she said, "Oh, I've got, 15 appointments with distributors," and she explained to us, and we felt bad because she had actually set up meetings with a whole bunch of people that really were not at all the people she needed to talk to. So just on the fact that these people were called distributors, which is the same word and in the same language, she made a set of assumptions that these people's profession was the same as distributors in her country. And that was not the case at all. So she had basically wasted her time. And it's such a simple, quick thing that we could have explained to her. And if we had been working with her, we would have set up the right meeting.
Interesting. So you find some good partners for them in the functional areas that they need, the kinds of issues that they're going to need to deal with, and you give them the introductions to these companies. So how do you help companies understand which one's the right fit for them? How do you help them understand if law firm A or law firm B or law firm C is really the best partner or best fit for them?
Mm. Well, I think the main thing is that we bring in all these people in, as I said, there's the panel discussions, but then we also hold a number of networking events where they get a chance to meet these different people, these different professions, and so that they have an array to choose from. Because just make an aside, a lot of the trade missions and other types of organizations that help or purport to help companies in these kinds of situations will give one name or two names and just say, okay, call these people.
Right.
And in real life, when you do business in your own country, that's not how you go about doing business. You don't just take one name and go. You meet all kinds of people. You meet, I don't know, a whole set of different types of lawyers and marketers and all this, and you choose by talking to them. So we wanted to reproduce this setting, and so in the networking they get a chance to speak to all these people. So that's for the setting. Now for the criteria, we share with the participants. We share what I was talking about before, the experience, and because they're already sort of pre-selected by us, if you will, they are well adapted for the participants. So then it's more a question of more the chemistry, or how they feel,
whether they
then it's
personally click or not.
Yeah. So they don't have to worry as much about all the other due diligence that you would have to do normally.
Very interesting. What advice do you give to your clients in terms of how to manage these relationships? Because it seems to me, having worked with a lot of outsourced vendors, step number one, and this is true if you're looking for distributors in our channel management practice too, it's the first step is finding a good partner, but then how you manage and communicate and evolve the relationship is just as important as finding the right partners. What advice do you give them on that?
Well, at the beginning of the program, the first part of the program is a 2-day workshop, if you will, in the home country, where we cover issues of strategy, whether they've chosen the right strategy, etc. But a whole day is dedicated to cross-cultural understanding and cross-cultural training. So we ask the companies to fill in a questionnaire, which gives us some insight into how they approach cultural differences, sort of what type of cross-cultural profile they have. And then we do this training. So it's not specifically about managing vendors, but it's really about how to communicate with people from the target country, in this case the US. How do you present your information? How do you interact? How do you react to requests? And those are all the outcomes, but we go through the cultural underpinnings and differences. So that helps them to understand the requests that are made of them, and then to respond in an appropriate fashion.
It's interesting. I know your company focuses on intercultural training, as you've mentioned, and it seems like many of the same skills that help people be successful across cultures are similar to those that help them be successful partners. Would you agree there's a lot of similarity?
Yes, and the reason I think is that when we talk about cross-cultural training and cultural differences, we usually mean national differences. And defining people by their nationality is one dimension,
Mm-hmm.
but it's one among many. So there's people from different regions that may have different cultures, people from different, as I said, departments, that's the French way, but states in
States,
the US. I mean, yeah, the
provinces.
culture in the
Yeah.
north and the south, right, are very different. And then actually, if you look further, I mean, there are differences in culture between companies,
Absolutely.
between departments in companies. And I wrote an article once that was basically the idea is that, there really only is a culture of one. Everybody has their own culture. So, all these trainings are basically taking groups of people and looking at general trends of types of behaviors that come from basically history, historical events, the background, that how the country evolved. For example, you look at the US and there's a very, entrepreneurial mentality and individualistic, and it's all from history. People who wanted to do things differently, and that's why they left Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, I've probably digressed at this point, but
No, no, no,
so
but
yeah.
I agree with that. And one of the things that occurs to me that there's a huge similarity is that partnering effectively, at least as we define it, in part is about finding a common set of processes, a common
Hmm.
permission, if you will,
Hmm.
to resolve conflicts, to bring conflicts to light and to resolve
Hmm.
them in a way that's constructive. Because
Hmm.
I don't care how good you are at finding partners of any kind,
Hmm.
or even how effective you are at managing those relationships, eventually there will be conflict, and how you
Hmm.
manage the conflict
Yeah.
is a real acid test of the success of the relationship. And it seems
Hmm.
to me that that's something that is true in terms of dealing across cultures, whether it's corporate
Hmm.
cultures or national cultures or regional cultures, is
Hmm.
you have to be able to understand how to resolve conflict effectively.
Hmm.
And so
Absolutely. Yeah.
I see that as
Hmm.
a real similarity.
Exactly. And everything in life is partnerships, really, when you look at it. I mean, husband and wife, friends, colleagues. I mean, it's all
Business
partnerships,
partners, yep.
and yeah, and it's about communicating effectively and constructively, and it's about listening to each other, and it's about exactly as you said, defining how to resolve conflict. So, I, yeah, this similarity, it's even more than similarity. I think it's all the same thing, really.
It's just maybe a different side of the same
Yep.
issue. Any last words of advice? Any final thoughts for our listeners about how to do business effectively in the U.S. if there are companies who are listening who are maybe struggling with growing their business in
Mm.
the U.S. or are thinking about coming to the U.S.?
Well, first of all, I'm in shock that we're already at the end of our time. I guess because I enjoy talking about this stuff. I'm very passionate about it. I think a lot of companies that come to the US specifically tend to think, this is a big country. If I can go only get a little small market share, I'll do great. And that's really not the way to look at it, because US consumers, and I mean US people in general, have become very, well, I don't want to use the word sophisticated, but demanding, I would say, demanding of very personalized, individualized types of products and services. So the whole concept of finding a niche is extremely important, and it can never, it's really very, very important to understand that. And along with that, targeting a small, I want to say a small piece of the US in a way. So either a state or even a city, depending on your product. And within that, a specific niche, a specific demographic. It doesn't seem to make sense to a lot of people who come here. It's like, it's a huge country. Why would I target a tiny little segment of it? But that's how you can achieve success, because that is going to be difficult. And once you do that, you can then expand more broadly.
You know, that's an interesting observation, and I've seen it with companies we've talked to, even companies who have been very successful in exporting to a number of other countries. And
Mm-hmm.
they do it, and they find a good distributor, and they get a toehold, and then they start to grow the business. And they come to the US and they think, well, we're just going to do the same thing. We'll just find our distributor, and they'll get a toehold, and we'll build from there. And it's hard to explain to them and to articulate exactly how different that is.
Mm-hmm.
It's so
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's a challenge.
it is a challenge. But any other final observations and thoughts?
I think something that people don't usually consider is it's an adventure. It, it it's fun, and if you are not in that mindset that it's going to be fun and interesting, and if you're not curious about the differences, but you're not going to do well, basically.
You'll just be frustrated.
So yeah, exactly. I mean, there are a lot of frustrations, so you need to counterbalance that with passion for learning, for discovering, for self-questioning. You need to have that kind of mentality, and otherwise you will not do well. But if you have that mentality, you'll enjoy every minute of it. And the fact that it's going to take you 3 times the amount of time you think it is, will be 3 times more fun.
That's great advice, Sophie. I think that's great advice for anyone looking to
Mm,
expand internationally. So
mm,
it's been a real pleasure to have you with us today, Sophie. Thanks so much. I appreciate you
Thank
sharing
you.
your thoughts with us.
Thank you. It was a fun chat.
Great. Well, we obviously wish Global Commerce Education and the G2 experience lots of success, and we'll watch the evolution of your company with lots of interest.
Thank you,
Um,
Doris.
and if any of the listeners would like to get in contact with Sophie, do you want to share your email with them?
Yes, it's S Lechner, like my last name, so SLECHNER at GCE email. So yes, there are 2 E's in there. .com.
Great. Well, that's a wrap for today. I hope our listeners have enjoyed our podcast about some of the challenges of building a business in the U.S. and the need for partnering to effectively penetrate the U.S. market. You can listen to interviews with many of our other guests by subscribing to our podcast on iTunes, on Speakific, or on our website at www.globalocityservices.com. Thanks again for listening.